Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining one of our live sessions here again from the Prince for Wildlife studio, aka my home, aka my kitchen back there, which you cannot see. My name is Marion. I'm one of the co-founders of Prince for Wildlife, and tonight I'm joined by the lovely Marcus Westberg, who is not only an exceptional photographer, one of our contributors, but also member of our advisory board at Prince for Wildlife. So he's as close as you can get to us, to the fundraiser. Thank you so much, Marcus, for making time for us.
My pleasure. Let's hope the internet holds up.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So I had lost Marcus before for a minute, but now he's here, and I hope it will stay like this. He's currently on assignment in Swallow in South Africa. That's why the connection probably isn't so good. Usually he's from Sweden originally, but he lives in Portugal since a couple of years, and has been working mostly though in Africa, as well as some Arctica and Asia assignments, I think, but a lot of Africa work happening in your portfolio. And you're one of the main photographers of African parks, which is, as you know, the beneficiary of Prince for Wildlife. So all the funds we raise through the Prince Hill go directly to African parks, which gives us the chance to really ask Marcus a bit of the insider stories behind what African Parks is doing.
The ones I'm allowed to tell. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The ones that are not under wraps.
Yeah.
But before we get to the juicy stories, please introduce yourself a little bit. I've said a couple of things, but would be interesting to hear kind of your backstory, how you started photography, how your love for Africa started when, oh no, I think I lost him. That's not a good start. I'm so sorry, you guys. While Marcus is gone, I'll just let you know that please feel free to use the chat box here on the right side. You can put in any questions that you have that he might be able to answer. We will talk about his work for African parks, especially about the last project. He joined the huge elephant translocation that just happened in Malawi. So he will tell us all about how these projects develop on the ground, what's it like to photograph them, how much is organized, how much is chaotic. So feel free to ask anything you'd like to know about the translocations, alongside all the other things he's been doing. He's back.
The pleasure of being in the bush. Right.
Yes.
I'll talk fast.
Exactly. Perfect. So I just asked everyone to feel free to post questions.
Oh, hang on a second. I know why this wasn't working. I sent the wrong link to my parents, and they've been trying to log in using the link you sent me, and it seems to kick me out. Maybe
Oh,
that's the problem.
that might be the problem. They're trying to log in
Okay.
as presenters.
Yes.
I mean, I can interview your parents as well.
Yeah.
They might not.
I don't think you should, to be honest. I think that's
You're allowed
right.
to say that.
Yeah. All right. My parents,
So yeah,
actually, they
yes.
took me on a safari to Kenya when I was 12 with my two younger sisters. So that's probably where the love for Africa started. Though I think my favorite book until that point was a large nonfiction book on the predators of the world. So I think I was sold on lions and leopards and cheetahs pretty early on.
And
And
your parents have
then,
been to Africa a
sorry?
lot before?
No,
Was
they'd
that
never been. That was the first time for them as well. So we went on a camping trip to Tsavo and the coast of Kenya. I think that was as much an adventure for them as for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that's an adventurous kind of trip to do for the first safari, to go on a camping trip to Savo
Yeah,
already.
look, my parents backpacked around the world for 10 months when they got married in the late 70s. So
Now
yeah.
we know where your genetics come into play.
Indeed. And then years later, in 2006, I went backpacking in Malawi for a bit over a month, and then I went to South Luangwa in Zambia, and I camped up on a tree platform at Flat Dogs at the time when they still had camping there for 3 weeks. Elephants walking underneath a tent every night, and baboons in the daytime, and I think that was that.
Oh, that sounds incredible. I've been to South Luangwa as well, and I want to go again. It's such an incredible place. They call it the Valley of the Leopards. Have you heard that as well? And it's true. You see leopards day.
Yeah, no, it's a lovely spot. It really is, and it's getting more popular, but it's, I think, still one of the more undervalued parks in Africa for sure.
Yeah, I think Zambia has a lot of those. I mean, Kafue, North Luangwa, Liuwa Plains. I suppose you've been to the other ones as well by now.
Quite a few. I haven't been to Liuwa Plains, but yeah, I've been to quite a few others. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll talk more about which of the parks you've seen. But when did the photography career start? Like, how did that kick off?
Much later. So I have half a degree in sports science from when I was quite a lot younger, and then I have a degree in conservation and environmental management from the late 2000s, and that's how I ended up moving to Africa. So I spent a year living in Kenya conducting a research project for my thesis.
No? Okay.
You know, as much as I enjoy seeing you, and as much as I love the video, I wonder if I should switch off my video just to make this easier. I might make at least
Or you could switch to mobile network if that is more reliable, in case you have a start.
3E bars, so I don't think so.
Not
But,
entirely promising.
no.
Okay, so everyone has said they have some connection, or we have some connection problems because they can hardly hear me sometimes. So I don't know.
Can people hear us now?
Better now, yes.
Let's see. No, I was asking them, not you. Aha.
Yeah.
See, there we go. They understood. Yeah, excellent.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry guys. The irony of this is that Marion and I spoke for about 30 minutes before we went live, and it was just perfect connection the whole time.
Exactly, and you jinxed it because you said, "Look, we have no connection issues." Like 1 minute ahead of the talk.
Yeah, no, true. I should know better. Exactly. Right. So where were we? Degree in conservation, and then yeah, so on that backpacking trip, which was about 4 years earlier, I met someone who talked about research students being hosted by CC Africa, as they were called at the time. So and beyond is what they're called now. And I picked up on that when I started studying again and negotiated for about 2 years and ended up being able to spend a year based in the Masai Mara. And by that point, I had some aspirations of becoming a photographer and decided that if I was ever going to become one, then that was the time. And so
you're
brought
entirely
camera gear.
self-taught.
Sorry? Oh yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, and very slowly, I might add. I should have taught myself quicker once I started, but yeah, there we are. Now I'm much better at reading instruction manuals and watching YouTube videos to learn the new specs of new cameras and things like that.
But I think in the beginning, at least for me, it was like that. You're overwhelmed by all the technicalities and the terms. You just want to shoot and kind of learn along the way. And of course, then you pick up technicalities slower, but you learn along the way. And I think you never stop learning, right?
For sure. But you know, like, so when I switched to Sony about a year and a half ago, that was the first time I ever used tracking and continuous shooting or continuous focus, autofocus. You know, for the first 10 years of my career, I just never went there, and I probably should have. But anyway, I got where I am anyway, so I suppose something went right.
That's true, and I think mirrorless cameras, when it comes to the tracking, are also much better these days. The software has improved so much. But this should not be a talk so much about cameras, although it's super interesting. And I'll ask you a few things in between as well. And also, you guys feel free to ask Marcus anything camera related as well, if you're interested in kind of what gear he uses, all of this stuff. But this is not a gear nerd talk. This is more talk.
And I'm not a gear nerd, so that I would not be the right person to answer your questions anyway. My camera is black, and
it says Sony on it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I needed to do.
Yeah, no, let's talk about the things that are, you're really passionate about and that's dear to you, and that's conservation. So it's not just about the photos and the imagery and the aesthetics of it all, but also what's behind the photos. And one thing that I love about your Instagram account is the captions you write under each post, and there's really much thought and also I think a lot of intelligence and research behind it, and you can tell from what you're sharing on Instagram. So you're one of the people where I really read long captions. You write a long text, but I do read all of it.
It usually goes, and then I have to start deleting a few words in order to just be able to finish what I'm trying to say. So
yeah, but you can tell that a lot of effort goes in there, and I mean, we can talk about that later, but I really am interested in how you see this connection between photography, conservation, storytelling, and how this evokes kind of passion and also involvement of other people who see your work, and how this interconnection comes into play in all of your work, actually.
That was many questions. Look, I mean, to begin with, I suppose I should say that photography for me, the reason that I didn't do anything with my academic career after finishing my thesis and handing it in was really because I saw that photography, through photography and writing as well, I had a chance to reach more people than I would if I went into research myself, for example. I also thought it would be more fun, because already during the year when I was doing my own research project, I was helping out at several others in the Masai Mara. I offered to help out with research as well, but in the end, they all needed more help with photos than with anything else, and so I got involved that way. And then I was so interested in the various projects that I got involved with, and then just figured that, look, if I can make this work, then I can just go around and I can cover other people's research projects and conservation projects, and I can learn a little bit about a lot of things as opposed to focusing on one topic for 5 years, which at that point I realized didn't suit me that well. I like learning, but I don't like having to go over it and write about it 10 times once I feel like I understand it. Then I want to move on to something else instead. So this was a way for me to do it. I didn't know how realistic it was, but eventually it worked out. As far as the greater connection, look, I think it's very easy to be overwhelmed by the fact that there are a lot of very significant threats, many of them on global levels. And we tend to think that solutions always have to be big as well. And it's true, we need big solutions, but we don't all need to change the entire world. And, I've had a few key people in my life, including an Earth Day obsessed, absolutely crazy and absolutely wonderful English as a second language teacher in middle school, who've had a really big impact on me. And so I figured, I don't need to reach 1 million people. If I can reach, one person or 5 people or 12 people, but at a deeper level, then you never know what those people are going to do. And that's connected to what we were talking about Instagram captions and things like that as well. I don't post to get likes. I don't really care how many people comment, as long as there are some people who read it and who feel like this is something that speaks to them and that they can connect to, and it might even change the way they think about some questions.
Yeah, at least for me, that definitely works. Like, I feel that I always read your captions, and they always move me in some specific way. So there's always some deeper level of thought back there. So I would urge everyone here to, if you don't already follow Marcus, to do that, because it's not just photography. I think you're much of a writer as well, not just a photographer.
Yeah. No, and sorry, I would just add that I think that it also gets to the point where I think that we need conversations, and so talking, images can be very powerful in that they evoke strong emotions, but you need to direct those emotions as well, and emotions can lead to conflict and not necessarily to building bridges, and so I think it's important to be able to find ways to talk about controversial issues in a calm, respectful way, regardless of whether you feel very strongly that one side is the correct side or not. You're not going to convince anyone who disagrees with you by calling them an idiot.
And shouting. Yeah, very true.
So I block people who shout on my account.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can disagree with me, but if you call anyone names, you're out.
You're done. Yeah, okay, that's very good. Good for your sanity, I suppose. Because you do reach a bit more than 5 people by now, I think. So.
Yeah, hopefully. No, I think so. But I don't take it for granted.
Yeah. Let's switch back gears a little bit to your Africa travels and your work in Africa. So one of the reasons we are inviting you today and having this talk is to get to know more of African Park's work. And you've been fortunate enough to work quite closely with them. You told me before that your first assignment came a bit by chance, just because you were in one of the parks and someone at African Parks noticed that you were there, and then you kind of got invited to photograph for them. So if you are okay, I would just start sharing a few of your photos, and you can talk a little bit about your experiences in the African parks that you visited.
Absolutely.
All right, let me pull those up now. Starting up here. So I hope everyone can see that. This is the first image that Marcus, you shared with us. It's from Akagera, which I've also been fortunate to visit, but you've been there much earlier than me. So that was your first trip, right?
Yeah, so this was an assignment not for African Parks, but for a different NGO. And I was being hosted in Akagera. And while I was there, I got in touch with the managers, and they asked if I would mind helping out getting a few rangers. And I did, and then they sent them on to the head of communications for African Parks, and I got invited. I was in the US for a while, and I got invited to a meeting with them. And a few months later, I was off on my first proper assignment for them.
Which was to which park?
Which was Odzala in the Republic of Congo.
And let me jump over to one of the Odzala photos. You are not just a wildlife photographer, right? Maybe that's also important.
No, exactly. So I change how I introduce myself every few weeks. I can never quite decide what sounds less pretentious and tacky, but mostly these days, I guess I would say that I'm sort of a conservation photojournalist and a travel writer, and everything that somehow gets encompassed by those things. And the reason that I tend to get the assignments I do for African parks, and I mean most of them are quite remote and logistically challenging parks where they don't send photographers very often at all, is because my work is fairly broad. So I tend to get sent in places where they need community shots, ranger photos, wildlife photos, landscapes, aerials, office and workshops, and portraits of people working there, and just absolutely anything that we can come up with, as well as stories for publications occasionally. So now we're looking at Odzala. So as you can see, this is from a school. I tend to dance when I need people to smile at me for photos. Not a very good dancer, which is probably why they enjoy it. But education is a really important part of conservation. It's an important part of community support, but also of being able to influence younger generations. So there's both education in the normal sense of languages and mathematics and all the rest of it, but it also tends to involve environmental education and perhaps most importantly, access to the parks. You know, a lot of people who live in communities on the borders of national parks and protected areas don't get to ever go in as visitors, and so their view, their perspective of the park will be very, very different from someone who goes in as a visitor. So it's really nice, and it's nice to be able to join a group of kids sometimes going in and seeing elephants for the first time, or at least seeing them in that light for the first time.
Yeah, not as a threat, but as maybe something worth protection, right? That's
absolutely
the mindset, how it changes for them. And then the second one from Otsala, very different shot. Maybe tell us about that.
Very different shot. So illegal wildlife trade is a massive problem in many parts of the world, Africa certainly. And this is a putty-nosed monkey that was rescued, confiscated by rangers, and then taken back to headquarters to be rehabilitated. Essentially, it was quite young; it wouldn't have been able to survive on its own. So it was raised by staff in Odzala for a couple of weeks before being released back into the forest again. And I like taking shots like this. First of all, I like hands, but I'm as you know, Marion, who follow my Instagram posts, I'm a big proponent of the connection between humans and non-human animals and nature in general, and the importance of that connection. So to me, anything that can symbolize that is nice. I try to keep my images light and positive if I can. I'd rather focus on the hopeful things and the problem that I'm covering, even if that's important as well.
I think that really shines through in your work, and we'll see the image that you donated to this year's campaign as well a little later.
I just want to say too, I've seen a couple of questions from Silke and Susanna there.
Oh, yeah.
I think these questions, because they don't apply specifically to the African park stuff, we'll get to them, but we'll just finish with this. But feel free to keep writing questions.
Thank you so much, for keeping track. So all your questions will be answered. Now here we have a few shots of Chinko. So maybe that kind of shows your variety from aerials to more documentary stuff about people. So I've never been to Chinko. What's that like?
Not many people have.
Right.
And they've been, African parks have been trying to send me there for like 6 years or 5 years before it finally worked out. I think we had 3 previous trips canceled for various reasons. The park ran out of fuel, and COVID was one time, and I can't remember what happened the first time. So it took a while to get there. It's probably one of the remotest places you can go to outside of, I don't know, Antarctica. Takes a long time to get there. You definitely have to fly. It takes several weeks for the truck to get in with supplies from the capital of Central African Republic. It's an incredible place. It's not easy. It was probably the most exhausting assignment I've ever done. We got there just after the rainy season started, so the humidity was incredible. The temperature was very high. There was just sets of flies and bees and lots of malaria. And infrastructure is not so present much of the time. But it's also pretty incredible, and very, very few professional photographers have ever been there. And it's a real up and coming success story. I mean, it's already a success, but I think, give it 5 or 10 years. This is an area that in the past was absolutely overrun by nomads with cattle and lots of armed groups, and now is not. And the habitat is recovering, the wildlife is coming back. So it's going to be a fantastic story in years to come. I think that the next park that we're going to get to after this, which is Garamba, is where I hope Chinko will be in 5 years. But yeah, Chinko is a special place. So that picture you're looking at now, that is essentially like an attendance sheet, you could say, being signed between a nomad from Sudan, who's a leader of his group of nomads, and a member of a so-called Tango team, who are themselves recruited from pastoralist communities in Central African Republic who are unarmed, and whose only job is really to make contact with these nomadic groups and talk to them and try to explain the importance of not bringing livestock into the protected area and so on. And then they basically just sign a paper, not saying they've agreed to anything, but saying that we've had this conversation, we've talked, we acknowledge that we sat down together. So it's a very interesting way of conducting conservation.
Otherwise, they wouldn't even learn that there's a park there that is protected, right? They have crossed those paths generations,
exactly.
Probably.
And look, and it creates some interesting problems, because these guys aren't the bad guys, if insofar as you can ever speak of good guys and bad guys. There are other more heavily armed groups who will get these guys to essentially pay taxes by giving up some of their livestock to them. And as African parks have secured Chinko more and more, I mean, a few of these guys that we talked to, they said it. They came straight out and said, "Look, we'll stay out of the park unless we come across one of these other groups, in which case we will go to the park because it's safe."
So
it gets complicated.
Ironic, almost. Well, I think, Marcus, in light of time, let's move on.
Move on. Yeah. So Garamba is in DRC. Really amazing success story.
A great example. Yeah. And we'll just browse through the other ones that you've been to. I think you could spend an hour at least talking about each of the parks.
Probably, yeah. So Majete in Malawi.
And Nyungwe also in Rwanda.
Yes.
One of the recent additions from African parks, and that's something we'll talk more about. That African parks are growing, adding more parks to their portfolio of managed parks, and Nyungwe is one of those that they added 2 years ago, and also already incredible what they've done there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Penjari
in Benin in West Africa.
And then Sakuma. And we've talked a lot about Sakuma with Michael Lawrence in his live session, because it's his favorite parks in the world, I think.
No, I don't blame him. It's a very, very nice place.
Then let's continue to your Malawi stories, because that's actually the main topic we wanted to discuss before we come to the questions. I hope that's all right for everyone. So Malawi, very tiny country in the middle of Africa. They call themselves the green heart, I think, of Africa.
The warm heart of Africa.
The warm heart, sorry. The warm heart of Africa. And they've been to Liwonde, which is so incredibly well managed that the elephant populations there have thrived to a level where it was almost too much, or is too much for that specific park, which means that African Parks was able to provide other parks with elephants from Liwonde. And you've been invited to join that translocation, which was one of the large ones. So they translocated 163 elephants within Malawi, so to another park inside the country. And I've never been at a translocation. I suppose many people haven't seen that live. So it's quite an event. It's years of preparation, from scientific research to logistics to legalities. Everything has to be organized, except for the attendance of photographers. From what I understood, that comes very short term.
Pretty short notice, yeah.
How much time do you even have to prepare, or how do you prepare for this assignment?
I mean, honestly, unless it's a journalism assignment, I don't prepare that much anymore. It's most of these assignments that I do are a lot about just taking things in your stride. So sometimes I will have a shot list, sometimes I don't, sometimes it arrives the day before I leave. But if you know, generally speaking, what you're meant to be doing and what's going to happen, and then at the end of the day, you get there, you sit down and talk to the right people, and then the first day you're working, but you're kind of watching, observing, learning as you go, and then that makes it easier to know in the days to come exactly how you can work and what you can do. So the first day of action, certainly for me, yeah, you jump in, but you also want to make sure to form good relationships with everyone at the same time and just take it a little bit step by step. So I don't prepare that much. Pack
That
my
helps.
bags.
I suppose your experience also helps, that you kind of already know a bit how these teams work, how many people
Yes,
are on
of course.
location, like how does it look if you're there one day?
I mean, it depends completely. So, I mean, this was so over 250 elephants in about 5 weeks. I was there for about 1 week. It was a lot of people. You've got a team from Conservation Solutions who are the ones who manage the translocation itself. I think they had 16 staff there. You've got veterinarians. You've got all the people from the park, from African parks. You've also got donors coming in to visit. So major African parks donors, and then you have occasionally journalists and photographers and all the rest of it. So it's busy. I mean, in the capture camp where I stayed, where we all stayed, I think, except for the donors, I think we had sort of between 30 and 50 people every night. So yeah, it's a bit hectic. The location itself is, the capture days are a lot of inactivity followed by pretty frantic activity. It looks like chaos. It's not really. I mean, it's very well organized. These guys know exactly what they're doing, but things happen very, very quickly once they start happening. So you might drive to a part of the park where the idea is that you're hoping to find elephants, and then you sit and you wait while they try to locate suitable herds from the air.
I think Marcus, shall I share a few of your photos?
Oh yeah, sure, by all means. Yeah,
been so kind to also provide a few of those photos.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, and then once they dart the elephants, then it's it's very, very quick, because you don't want to keep them sedated for longer than necessary. So several veterinarians and several team members will jump in on different elephants and try to get them safely lifted into the trucks, and then they wake them up again once they're in the trucks and get them ready for the move to, in this case, Kasungu National Park in the western part of Malawi.
Yeah, I'm showing a few of the photos that you sent, so maybe illustrate a bit what's happening here. I know people are always a bit, I don't want to say upset, but
worried.
They are
concerned. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's simply the safest way to lift the elephants. They, as you can see, they fasten. I don't want to call them ropes. They're not quite ropes. I'm having a brain freeze now. What the English word would be for like straps, I guess, around the legs of the elephant, so that they can carefully lift them down. What you can see in this photo is that for the most part, you will have somebody holding onto the trunk and somebody trying to balance the elephant, and then they carefully lower him or her into the truck, again very carefully. And then once they've filled a truck, or if they have them in one part and move them across, then they will go in and they will inject them to wake them up all simultaneously, and then get out very, very quickly, because it's not that great to be inside a very small space with 5 elephants who are just waking up.
Yeah, but I think what's important to mention is that it's always the whole family that is translocated.
Absolutely. So that's why there's so much waiting time before, because they need to find a family herd, and they need to get them into an area where they can be sure that they can dart all of them. But generally what it means is they need to dart all the adults, because the young ones will stay with their mothers. So first they will dart the adults, and then they will go in on foot and dart any that they couldn't dart from the air of the younger ones. They will simply go in and give them injections.
Oh, I think either me or
I can see you, but not the photos anymore.
For questions, I think I was gone for a second.
Right. Yeah, I think the pictures disappeared.
Yeah. Okay. I'm so sorry about that. So the photo that I showed last of the elephants in the river, I suppose this is an area where you would not be able to capture them, right? If they're in the water, they're in the water.
Exactly. Yeah, no, for sure. So that was just me wanting to photograph a wild elephant herd in the park.
But it's one of those photos that I think African parks will use throughout a longer
I'm
duration to
sure.
illustrate like elephants in Malawi, because it's a beautiful shot. And this
Yeah,
is kind of,
thank you. And it's kind of a typical scene for Liwonda as well, because the Shire River, or Shire River, that flows through the park is such an iconic part of that park, and you do often find elephants, if not in the river, then certainly drinking at the edge of the river.
yeah, it's a lovely photo. I think before we go through more of the other photos, let's look at the questions, because it's already
Sure.
more than 30 minutes into our talk, and I don't want to disappoint anyone. So Silke has asked, that was the first question, how you get your assignments.
Well, these days, more, well, it depends, because I work with different things, but the conservation assignments these days tend to be either because I've already worked with the organizations before, or because they have seen my work or heard of my work, or they, it's a pretty small world. So I'm going to Namibia in a couple of weeks, and I'm working with 4 different NGOs. One of them, say the Rhino Trust, I did some work for last year, and they wanted to get me back, and they were happy enough that they've been trying to make sure that there are other groups who will also hire me for a few days each to make it worth my while to go there. So I mean, that more often than not, that's how it happens now. Journalism assignments, it's a bit different, for especially travel work. That's more deciding with either on my own or with a good friend of mine who's a travel writer based out of London, where we want to go and what stories we want to do, and then contacting publications that we worked with before, and seeing who wants to publish it.
So you're still pitching, basically.
Yeah, well, certainly for that. I mean, it's, if you want to choose your assignments as opposed to say yes or no, to something that you're offered, then absolutely. And for travel, I don't actually do that many travel assignments that aren't also conservation assignments, and so I choose them very, very carefully. And my friend and colleague has children, and so he can't travel that much of the year, and so we tend to, we do 2 or 3 trips every year, and we choose those locations pretty carefully. So this year we've been to Algeria, and we went to the Aral Sea in Uzbekistan, and we will go to the Himalayas, to Bhutan, a little bit later this year for the reopening of the Trans-Bhutan hiking trail.
Yeah, I can't wait to see your photos from there, even if it's going to be physically challenging, as a lot of your trips are. I think it's always worth the effort you put in there.
Let's hope so.
So I hope, Silke, that answers your question. I think getting assignments probably is different for every photographer. Depends on how you work, if you work commercially or more editorially, and
it
at the
changes
beginning
over
of
time.
yeah, exactly. With your network and your reputation, it changes as well.
I mean, I will just add very, very quickly that for me in the beginning, the fact that I had a background in conservation and research made all the difference in the world. It was so much more valuable than having a photography degree or anything like that.
Yeah.
My early access all came because I wasn't just a photographer. I think a lot of the projects early on, they saw my background and said, okay, well, at least he's not going to mess up our work in the field, and that helps.
Understand it. Yeah. No, that definitely adds a layer of quality to it. Susanna Jolly has asked, and it's a longer question, so I just read it to you. Given the time you've been able to spend in the Masai Mara and other protected areas, how do you see the future of wildlife conservation and protected area management in Kenya and throughout Africa? Are there specific actions you would like to see implemented that are not currently or widely being undertaken? So it's a broad question. You have to know Susanna is one of our amazing supporters. She has been there from the start, and I think her walls must be covered in prints. So thank you, Susanna.
Glad to hear it.
I have to mention that here. So maybe you can answer a bit about that question.
Without speaking for an hour, yes.
Yeah.
Look, in short, there are aspects of what is being done certainly in parts of Africa and by some organizations, and such as African parks, that I think much of the rest of the world can learn from. I mean, I think tourism is a is a very imperfect tool, but it is a very important one if used correctly. And I think Africa is a perfect example of how crucial tourism can be, nature-based tourism, if used well for conservation efforts. I think, you know, the involvement of, and proper involvement, not token projects, the involvement of local communities, whether through employment or education projects, or I mean, but also voices, you know, stakeholders, is essential for long-term sustainability. But at the same time, I like what I've seen, especially with African parks, but not only them. These sort of government NGO partnerships, they often seem to work quite well. And not always perfectly, of course. I mean, I don't think anything works perfectly, but I think it has a lot going for it, especially when it comes to outside funding, which is really important. You know, we need to reclaim, without disenfranchising anyone, we need to reclaim areas that should be wild, and that goes for the rest of the world as well. I mean, you know, my native Sweden, we are protecting a fraction of the habitat that we need to be protecting, and some of that is destroyed and needs to be rewilded first, and then, as we've seen with the elephants in Malawi now, repopulated. You know, yes, one of the reasons why you have this translocation is that the pressure of the elephant population in the Wanda is getting too big. You know, it's a fenced park, it's not that big. But the other reason is it is now possible to bring them back, or to increase the numbers of elephants in Kasungu, for example, where the population has been very low in the past, but it's now deemed safe enough to repopulate. And that's really, really fantastic news.
Yeah, we had a long talk also with Kate Oxman about repopulation of, she called her talk conservation on the home front. So we talked about, you know, bringing wolves back. Same is happening here in Austria, where I'm at home. Bringing wolves back is a huge undertaking, and without them having the space, we run into the same issues like everywhere else. But yeah, that's a whole other discussion, and I hope, Susanna, we could touch base a little bit on also the model that African Parks works under, which is, I think, really what you said, like this combination of community-based conservation that, as opposed to fortress conservation, where communities are, as you said, like involved on a level where they get to, you know, make decisions as well and partake in this long-term approach. I think that's what works so well with what African Parks does.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, which is why their contracts tend to be for, you know, 10, 15, sometimes much longer years. And that, I think that long-term vision is essential.
Yeah, and I think that is maybe also why it works so good, like as opposed to an only governmental management. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that, but governments usually, you know, their terms are much shorter. So this is where
absolutely. And mine, you know, it's enough that, as we've seen in DRC, you only need one politician to change their mind and say that, you know what, we're gonna allow oil exploration inside the continent's oldest national park.
Yep. Yeah,
it's complicated.
Yeah, let's not talk about politics too much.
Let's not.
That late at night, it's dangerous. Let's see, other questions. So Silke has also asked, what do you think is the most important issue to be solved to save nature, as well as give locals a perspective for the daily life? Oh, another long and complicated question.
I mean, look, I think we partially covered it already. I mean, certainly stopping habitat destruction as far as what we need to do for nature. Climate change is really important. I'm not denying that. In the long term, it might prove more important than anything else. But if we lose the rest of our wild habitats in the next 10, 15 years, I mean, climate change will make a big difference for us, but you know, we're going to have so many extinct species by that time that they're not coming back just because we managed to later fix that problem. So I think the most immediate problem is to first stop habitat fragmentation and destruction, and then expand on those the suitable habitats for healthy wildlife populations. You know, to get healthy ecosystems back, like functionally intact ecosystems that can work without our direct intervention, which unfortunately, you know, we need a lot of the time now, because the places are so small that without our support, you know, the They simply can't function as they should be able to.
Yeah, I think there was one of your posts that I was really touched by. You're talking about hands-off versus hands-on conservation, and there's this romantic idea about hands-off conservation. Just leave everything as it is, leave it untouched, and it will thrive. But we have touched natural spaces so much that we need to be hands-on now to reverse.
There is nothing that's hands off, anymore, and often things that we do with very good intentions. Again, our perspective is just different. So you put in, tourism is super important for conservation to support it financially, but then you need the wildlife to be present. So you put in some water holes in order to make sure that the animals are nearby, but then that stops the elephants from migrating, and then that causes deforestation in your area, and then 100 years down the line, you've completely changed the entire ecosystem. And it was all good and well intended, but yeah, and that can of course impact areas that are hundreds of kilometers away that maybe used to receive elephants who would migrate there. And so
Sorry, I think either me or you were breaking up a little, but now it seems we're back.
We'll see. I think Ishita's we answered already. That was about Malawi.
Yes, about the scale of the project.
People involved.
Yeah, you talked.
So then we have Kartik, how wildlife photographers can help with conservation efforts. So my first, well, I have two pieces of first advice that I always give. The first one has absolutely nothing to do with photography, because I think the most important aspects of photography have nothing to do with photography, and that is simply being considerate, kind, and compassionate in life. I mean, who you are as a photographer or as a guide or as a whatever you are, whatever you work as, is just an extension of who you are as a person. There's no point in being an ethical wildlife photographer if you're a jerk as a human being. So just be, and I think at the end of the day, unless you're really lucky with where your career goes, your biggest impact in life is actually less likely to be as a photographer than it is who you are as a person and how you are as a person. Like we talked about earlier, maybe you don't need to touch 1 million people. Maybe you need to touch 10. And maybe that won't be through your images. Maybe that'll just be because you're nice and you smile at people and you help when you can. I'm sure that's not one aspiring wildlife photographer wants to hear, but that's my honest advice. And I think it's when I managed to stick to it, it's stood me in good stead as well. And the other thing is to just start locally. It's easy, and I know that might seem a bit strange coming from me, seeing as I work all over the world, but it's easy to get caught up in the romanticism of wanting to go and work in exotic places. But if you want to maximize your impact, certainly, before you are able to build up a significant career, then supporting local conservation projects, helping out, find a bird rehabilitation center near where you live and see if they need some help with images, or if you can create some pieces for a local newspaper about them, or help them with fundraising. It's not only will you have more of an impact in the sense that you will have easier access, you're not going to spend a fortune doing it, but it'll help you grow. You'll be able to come back to the same places, and it'll help your reputation grow, because it's small communities work like that, and you may as well start where you start in your own backyard, so to speak.
I love that answer, Marcus. Thank you so much. I would love to even have that as the last question, but there is one more. If you've been to Tembo Plains by Felix.
I have not.
Okay.
So that was an easy one.
Sorry for the disappointment. And then Karl-Heinz, I don't know if you've seen that, has said sensational work in Malawi. He saw your work in the Robin Pope Safari newsletter. Right. Seems they featured some of your photos there.
Yeah.
Speaking of photos, I think now is the perfect moment to show the image that you have donated to this year's Prints for Wildlife edition. Don't you agree?
All right. Absolutely.
Let me share that one. Last but not least. So tell us a bit about that image. What's the story behind it? Where is it?
This is in Kahuzi-Biega National Park, which is another one of those not so easy parks to work in, but one of my favorites. It's in eastern DRC, so Congo, south of Lake Kivu. So on the other side of the lake from Virunga National Park, which is a bit more famous. And these are eastern lowland gorillas, Grauer's gorillas. So they're the close cousins of mountain gorillas. They are a little bit larger than mountain gorillas, so they're the biggest primates in the world. And they're actually in a lot more trouble than the mountain gorillas, right? So there are more Grauer's gorillas, but their population is declining much, much faster because most of them don't live in well-protected parks and reserves. So they've lost like 80% of their population in a couple of decades. And there's only a few thousand left now. Whereas the mountain gorilla population is steadily increasing. So I spent, this is way back in 2014, I was working with Gorilla Doctors, which is a non-profit organization of veterinarians who basically intervene in the field with mountain and eastern lowland gorillas if they find injured or sick individuals, because there are so few left. And yeah, I spent a few weeks with them working in Uganda and a few weeks in Congo. And this was in the first stint in Congo. It wasn't my first time with gorillas, but it was my first time with proper time with the gorillas. And yeah, I love the fact that, especially because we were able to be in the field for a bit longer than you would as a tourist, there was quite a lot of clearly just checking us out. And I mean, I've always enjoyed this photo. It's probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite, gorilla photo that I've taken, both because the gorilla on the left is so clearly unamused by us, but also because of the expression on the face of the other one, who to me seems like there's, I don't know, some kind of unrequited love going on there. It's just a kind of longing look at this at the other one.
Unanswered.
At least that's what I'm imagining there.
Very possible. Yeah, thank you so much for that incredible contribution, for the story behind it as well. I remember Michael Lawrence said his advice to people going on gorilla treks is to leave the camera at home because it's so incredibly complicated to take decent gorilla photos because of light and all of the
exactly.
Play. So
you kind of hope for overcast days and that you have a camera with really good high ISO capability, which I did not have in 2014. I lugged around a 500 millimeter lens in the rainforest, which I have never done since. I can tell you that much. On a tripod.
Lot of sweat and tears went into this photo, I suppose.
Yes, and thorns and nettle burns and ant bites.
Oh my God! Tell us about it.
No, better not. Like I said, not one of the easiest parks, but the memories are good.
Yeah, I think next time if we have another conversation, you have to show us a few of the behind the scenes photos, because in your stories you sometimes share these, like how it looks where you're camping and how the tent setup is and where you keep your gear on a little stool so that it's high up and not in the water on the ground. So
you do get a lot of comments about like, oh, you have my dream job, and I said I'm not sure I do. A fifth of my job is your dream job. The rest of it,
not so much.
Not so comfortable. But I'm doing it by choice. So
no, that's true. It's your own fault.
Yeah. But I wouldn't quite agree with Michael. I would just see, because there is someone Silke's going to see gorillas. I would bring a camera, but I would not bring a 500 millimeter lens. I bring smaller lenses these days and get the whole body. It's fine. I don't need to have a close up of the face.
That makes sense. So Silke, please take that advice to heart. No 500 millimeter lens in case you own one. Rather go for like 70-200 or something. Yeah, 70-200. Yes.
Yeah, 70-200 is great. Yeah.
Good glass. Sounds like a good idea. And I think when Michael says that, don't bring a camera, he's also talking to a very specific clientele who's,
I'm sure,
maybe not photographers, but
no, for sure. No, but there is, but I mean, look, and to make a more general point from that, there is, of course, something to it. And I think one of the blessings of being able to spend so much time photographing, and with the development that comes from that, is the ability to very often, very quickly know whether something is worth photographing or not, and if it's not, just enjoy it. Whereas in the beginning, it tends to be you try to photograph absolutely everything, even if you're fairly certain that none of it's going to work out, but you do it anyway just to be sure, and that can lead. I'm not the kind of I've never believed that you can't experience something through the camera, because I think you absolutely can once it's second nature. But if you have to think about things too much, then probably not. And I think spending time with gorillas is probably the most, for me at least, special wildlife experience you can do anywhere in the world. And you don't want to spend all of it behind the lens. I mean, it really is just the mutual connection. I mean, with chimps can be the same, but they are less chilled. So you're not quite as relaxed being near them as you are with gorillas. So it's just such a reminder of where we came from, and our sort of our mutual shared past, and how closely related we are. And you never gets old. But even if you only get to do it once, then just be sure, for at least some of the time, you just be there and soak it all in, or soak it all up, rather.
Yeah, cherish it. Okay, I think you've sold everyone on gorilla tracking now. At least
Yeah.
Silke definitely is very much excited to go now, and I think you'll have a wonderful time. So, yeah, I think that brings us to the end of our talk. Marcus, thank you so much for your time. Okay, one last question from Felix.
From Felix.
Any languages?
Yeah, so in the early days, I mean, so I speak obviously English and French in addition to my own language, and French and English will get you pretty far. In the early days, I would spend much longer in individual countries, and then I mean, so I didn't learn any languages, but I certainly had enough words to be able to do basic greetings and communications in Swahili, for example, and in Chichewa for Malawi and Eastern Zambia. Malawi in particular, spent a lot of time there, but this is 15 years ago. But ever since then, I travel. I mean, my assignments tend to be shorter. It's often like 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks in one place. Might be anywhere between 10 and 20 assignments in a year, often in different countries, and often you can be in one place, like you can be in a park like Odzala, and there are several languages that are spoken locally. So even with each other, local people often speak French because it's the mutual language. And with work becoming much more intense than it was early on, when I wasn't working on assignment in the same way, there's just I haven't even had time to start learning Portuguese yet, and we've officially been living in Portugal for like a year and a half.
And you're about to stay more permanently, I think I've heard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're at age 39, together with my wife, finally buying my first house.
And you have dogs and all of it, so it's the whole
We have
shebang.
shelter dogs, and soon we'll have a veggie patch. And yeah, luckily I have a wife who is very who is very kindly taking care of those things, so that I can continue to do these assignments.
Your assignments. Well, thank you so much for answering that final question. It was lovely talking to you, listening to your stories. Much appreciated, and I think it all ties in so nicely in this year's Prince for Wildlife campaign, because that's all about supporting African parks on their trajectory to growth. So their goal is to grow to 30 parks by 2030. Right now, currently they're managing 20 parks, so that would mean 10 more protected areas.
Yeah, and there might be some updates by next week on that number, but we'll see.
All fingers crossed, but let's not jinx it again,
let's not jinx
right?
that either. Yeah.
Exactly.
Not sure I have that power, but yeah.
But yeah, we're kicking off the Print Sale this Sunday, so your incredible gorilla shot alongside many other incredible photos will be up for sale as of Sunday. And Before that, we'll have one more live session here on the webinar tool with Matt Todd, who is on the board of African Parks in the UK. So he'll be able to tell us even more about African Parks, what they're doing. So it's going to be hopefully a really interesting chat. Yeah, thank you, Marcus. Any last words?
No, thank you. This is it's a pleasure to be a part of this. I mean, as you know, I did an interview on Manga Bay a few days ago, and spoke specifically about, you know, the fact that, I mean, in fact, I may have suggested that it would be a good question to ask. You know, just a reminder that these are all freelance photographers. I mean, strictly speaking, we are in some sense of the word competitors with one another, and the fact that, you know, that so many are willingly contributing for free to a collaborative project like this is a really wonderful sign of where I think we need to be if we are going to have any kind of real impact in the world. So, you know, thanks to you and to P for initiating this project and for letting us be a part of it. It's no, it's a great thing to be doing together with, as you say, so many other fantastic photographers.
It's a pleasure doing it. You know, I'm always saying that as much energy we have to put in, there's tenfold coming back, and that's also thanks to everyone that's here in the live talk today and everyone that's maybe watching this later. So a huge thank you to all of you guys. Thank you again, Marcus, for joining, and I wish you all a lovely evening or a lovely day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you next time. Thank you
very much.
Bye.